Welcome back to OpenLine, everybody. Glad you were with us. We are talking with a licensed therapist. We are talking with Ruth Martin about setting boundaries to maintain our mental health. That's essentially what we're talking about. We've already had a caller who was frustrated by something he couldn't control. You know, what does he do about that? Love to hear from you about whatever situation you have. I said as we went to break, seasonal depression.
Yes.
So we now have this. It's getting dark so early. Is seasonal depression real? What do we do about it? What do you see as far as seasonal depression?
I mean, it's absolutely real. Again, there's like in everybody's situation, there's going to be nuances because maybe some people it is more of like a biological factor. If their sleep is already off and then this impacts it even more. We're inside more. It's cold. We're not as active. And we also just have this meaning, like we've all developed this meaning with like cold, like even my face changed. I'm like, it's cold instead of like, ooh, it's cold. You know, when it comes to seasonal depression, it's a host of issues. There's the biological nature. It is darker earlier. It is cold. That we can tend to get more sick. You know, there's all of that. But then there's also situational. So like in winter, we just had, you know, fun outdoor summer. We had more flexibility in our lives. And now we're in this really hectic season of gatherings or lack of gatherings, end of year quotas. Like there's all the stuff that we try to cram in at the end of the year. And then we're also reflecting on our year too. So it's with the quiet of the season, it can cause more introspection, which can be a good or bad thing, boredom, and really just a lack of options. That's what I feel like really contributes to seasonal depression outside of the biological causes, is that we don't have as many options for what we want to do in our day.
That's very interesting. I hadn't thought of seasonal depression. Part of that being it's the end of the year. Maybe you are reflecting on your year. That's very interesting. The gatherings, certainly, there's no question about that. And then the lack of gatherings. I mean, so if you're going, that can be stressful. If you're not going, that can be stressful. Yeah. So there's a lot going on.
There's a lot there.
And so what do you do? So somebody comes in and says, these are my problems. Where do you start with that person?
I try to get them to prioritize. What is causing them the most grief? What's causing them the most trouble in their day-to-day life? And where would they like to go? So it's that idea of being able to brainstorm without editing, because you start there. Again, most of us like adults, we've lived enough life to where if we have an idea, we start to pick it apart. Oh, well, I can't say no because they will do this, and then I will say that, and then I will feel bad. We already have, because we have those experiences, they're in our file folder. And so the idea of letting yourself dream for a little bit, even if it's not completely reasonable, you can edit it off, but that can also inspire an option that might be close to it. So like if I feel compelled to go to a gathering and I feel like I have to stay the whole time because I'm a people pleaser, the idea of not going is not an option, but maybe going for 1 hour is.
Right.
But you have to be able to explore all of that before you know exactly where you want to go or what's even doable in the season of life.
If you're a people pleaser, and we talk about, should you change? If you're a people pleaser, is that bad?
No, I mean, it's not bad. Only you really can determine that. You know, if you are happy, if you are content, if you aren't feeling cynical or bitter, and you are giving all day and you have the energy to do it, please keep doing it. Please, because that works for you. But what works for you might not work for me. I might need to pull back because I am becoming resentful, or I'm in, you know, it's winter and my sleep patterns are off, and that gives me less energy to do what I need to do. It's all about what's working for you and what's not, and being honest about that.
You, in some of these notes here, you have topics you should avoid in discussion. I guess it says inappropriate workplace topics. I think I was told these were inappropriate like all through school. But I feel like we talk about them and they're a disaster half the time. Politics. Yeah. We talk about that on this show, and that's fine on the show. Religion, financial problems. So if you're at work and you're talking about politics, religion, financial problems, there could be some problems.
There can be problems if you're not willing to go into nuance. And if you're not willing to give people space to think differently than you. So in this idea of you can respect somebody's You cannot agree with somebody's opinion and still respect it, because we both have the right to either be right or wrong. And it's that idea, we often think that validation is affirmation, but validation is understanding. So if I go into a conversation that's hard, or if somebody's sharing with me their political beliefs and I don't agree, if I get curious and try just to understand where they're coming from, or understand to a certain level, or even just hear them, that may be all. I don't have to change that person.
Right. That's where we are today. Everyone wants to persuade people to their point of view, have them see it from their point of view, and so the best thing you can do is listen. But yeah, it's hard to persuade people, and that can't be everyone's goal.
It can't be your goal every time, and I'm actually glad that we do have these conversations more. I do think that we need to get back to the art of nuance in these hard conversations, and being able to find whatever common ground we have, but also if there's a hard line, if there's a non-negotiable within that, just saying like, hey, I can't meet you over there. I can't meet you over there. Our relationship may change, but this is where I want to go. So it's that idea of, if we can't convince them, then we might have to reevaluate things.
And have you encountered a lot of people, let's talk about the political part of it, that have either lost friends, or they've struggled with friends or family as a result of political differences, and how do you work through that?
It's going to depend on the relationship, because I have seen that happen a lot, and in full disclosure, I've experienced it, and it's not easy. And I think, again, mid-30s, we grew up in an era like where we didn't know everything. We didn't have access to all the information. So we now have more information. We're trying to process it. We're trying to make it make sense. And these conversations are fuel for change. And some of the things that are being called out are absolutely necessary to begin addressing. And it's that idea of, sometimes people that are more loud about it, it's because they haven't been heard. They've been trying to say it, like, hey, there's a fire behind you. And you're like looking at me, and I'm like, no, there's really a fire behind you. And I might have to scream in order just to be heard. But that's because a lot of times we're listening to answer. But if we slowed down, tried to gain understanding and curiosity, and know that we don't have to compromise on our values just to understand and hear someone, we might get further.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought up. I wonder, are we healthier now, mentally, whatever, than we were, again, a generation ago? A generation or so ago, things were not as out in the open.
Right.
We didn't know lots of things. So people were suffering in silence, perhaps.
Yeah.
Now, everything's out in the open, and it's maybe a little too much, but maybe that's healthier. I don't know. So I wonder what's healthier. Is it when a generation ago people will go, oh, those are the good old days, and that was definitely when it was healthier? Or is it now, things are inappropriate now that were okay back then, and that shows real progress. So we are making progress.
Yeah.
But is it, are we better off now, or is it a big mess now?
Oh my gosh, I'm going into like mental health inception of like, oh, what's the meaning of life? What if it's not about going to how things were, but what can we do better now? Because maybe we were healthy with the information we had at the time. Maybe we weren't healthy. Maybe we were ignoring things. And now that we have this onslaught of information, what do we do with it? And I haven't thought this thought out completely through, but maybe, just maybe, we're trying to solve new problems with old tactics, or thinking that it should be this way, like it should have stayed that way. And what if elements of that can come to the present? It's not a fully thought out thought, but that's kind of where I'm going with it. Of back then we were healthy in that context, or unhealthy, and now we're existing in this context, and there's different levels of health, and it's going to depend on the person and the situation they're in and what the season of life is. I keep saying that because I believe there's working on something or through. When you're working on, you're improving. things. Like you have the energy, the resources, the time to basically climb up the mountain. When you're working through something, it's like crawling in mud. And you have to get through it in order to get out. Like you can't just stand up and walk, you have to crawl through it. And when you get out, you often feel worse. But the goal is to not make it worse. It's not to stay in the mud.
And we have both in our lives, is that true?
Absolutely.
We go through both of those things. Very interesting. I like that. Okay, let's go to Pearl. Hello, Pearl.
Hey, y'all. Well, I guess my question tonight is kind of working through something and getting stuck in the mud. I recently, I think it was this weekend, I saw a rerun, overheard with Evan Smith with Nikki Giovanni on it, and she had coined a term for her doctor for what she was going through with too much grief at once, and she called it the Nikki. How do you, if you allow yourself for the first time to actually go through grief, which I think she was addressing because she said she'd never learned to cry, but actually feeling it and reeling with it and going through it to get it out of the way. Because personally, I've been through delayed grief before a couple of times. It's not fun when it pops its ugly head up 2 years later and you have to start dealing with it. But how do you let yourself go through singing the blues and go through it and go through all those things? Should you rush it up or should you go through the process? You know, if you're kind of riding on a wave of a low, is it okay to pick a little high, like you say, take a back road, take a different road, and then the next minute be pulling weeds and bawling your eyes out? How do you process grief? I know we're not all the same, but how do you process grief? And is there anything wrong with going through it too long? For instance, if you work at a job where you use your shoulders a lot and you got inflammation, they'll give you a cortisone shot and throw you right out there. I think that's what a lot of people do with grief, and there are some people that just don't do that at all. They just get right back out there. What's a good way? Should I shut up now?
No,
this is, I love that metaphor.
Pearl, another good question. I feel like good. That was good, Pearl. All right, process grief. How do we process grief? What about that?
What's hard is that grief is a major change, and I love Pearl. Like she's got it going on. Like she knows a thing or two, because pulling weeds, crying, that actually sounds really lovely. Just like take out the weed and throw it down. I tend to get a little angry when I grieve. There's no, like she said, there's no one recipe for processing grief. If you are actively avoiding it, it is going to pop up on you. If you are engaging in it to the point where it feels like too much, there's a whole spectrum in between. I've realized how many metaphors I have. I'm going to drop another one for you. So imagine being around a lot of puppies, and every puppy has an emotion on its shirt, and one's grief and one's happiness. If you're constantly tending to the happy puppy because that's all you want to pay attention to, the grief puppy's going to chew your shoe. So there's a way for you to give the happy one a bone and let it go exist and tend to the grief one, because we can't hold on to our grief really tight, just like we can't hold on to our happiness tight. Because sometimes we will be in mud, sometimes we'll be on the top of the mountain, and we need both. We have to feel all things in order to exist, in order to really be safe. If we shut down our ability to feel one thing, that goes across the board, and then we don't feel fear, and then we don't feel joy.
And what about too much grief all at once? And this notion that if you don't deal with grief at the beginning, it'll come back. Is that an absolute, or what about if you don't deal with it? How long does it take? What about that?
I mean, I don't have a calculated amount, but I do think that any emotion that you're trying to actively avoid, if you try to control it, it's going to control you. And that sounds very absolute, and I try not to exist in absolutes, but that is one thing through and through in my practice that I've seen. If you're actively avoiding something, sometimes it fades away and you get lucky, but a lot of times it comes back. But the idea of like too much at once, so it just depends on like how much space we have for it. You know, if I recently, I lost my grandmother, and I had done so much grieving ahead of time because I knew that it was coming, that when she did pass, I was sad and I missed her because of the change of life, but I actually had a better understanding and acceptance of it. Now, if I lose somebody that I didn't expect at all, that's going to be a whole different process because there was no prep.
Yeah, okay, very interesting. All right, we'll take a break, come back, continue our discussion. There's the number if you want to call, 615-737-PLUS. Take a break, be back right after this.